When you finally let go, it wasn't just a breakup. It wasn't just the closing of a chapter or the end of a relationship. It was the removal of a mirror she had been using to avoid looking at herself. See, what most people don't understand is that sometimes being with someone doesn't mean they're growing. Sometimes the comfort of another person's presence becomes a way to escape accountability, to stay numb, to stay distracted. She was using you, whether consciously or not, to shield herself from the deep, unsettling truths she didn't want to face about her own life. Your presence, your patience, your effort, your constant availability became a cushion for her unresolved pain. You made things easier, not because you were weak, but because you cared. You gave her the benefit of the doubt over and over again. You excused the emotional distance. You justified the mixed signals. And every time you showed up, even after she pushed you away, she didn't have to face the consequences of her own emotional avoidance. She didn't have to sit with herself because you were always there, ready to carry the emotional burden she wasn't yet willing to hold. But the moment you walked away, that was the moment reality set in. At first, she probably felt a strange kind of relief, because losing someone you take for granted doesn't feel real until the silence grows too loud. Days pass, and the phone doesn't light up with your name. The routine texts don't come. No check-ins. No how are you. No one asking if she made it home safe. She goes through the motions, but something feels off. Something's missing. And not just anyone. You. It's in that silence where the truth begins to rise. Without your steady presence to distract her, she starts to see the gaps in herself, the emotional holes she expected you to fill, the unresolved wounds she hoped love would somehow fix. And it hits her, slowly, painfully, that she wasn't giving as much as she was receiving, that she had been loved deeply, perhaps even unconditionally, and she met that love with indifference. Why? Because facing the truth meant changing. It meant growing. And growth always hurts more than comfort. She begins to revisit conversations in her mind, things you said, things she dismissed, warnings she brushed off. She realizes how many chances she was given, not just by you, but by life itself. How many moments she could have stepped up, could have tried harder, could have been more present. But she didn't, because you were still there. And now, you're not. This is when regret starts to take root. Not because you left in anger, not because you made her feel guilty, but because your absence forced her to finally meet herself. And that version of her, the one stripped of distractions, the one left to sit in the ruins of what she let fall apart, that version is hard to look at. And yet it's the beginning of something honest, something real. You see, letting go isn't just about protecting yourself. Sometimes it's the most powerful act of love, because staying while someone self-destructs doesn't save them. It enables them. It tells them, you don't need to change. I'll carry this weight for both of us. And while that may feel noble, it's not sustainable. It's not love in its truest form. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and allow someone to face the fire they've been avoiding. She wouldn't have grown if you had stayed. She wouldn't have changed if you had kept showing up. You walking away broke the cycle, and she might hate you for it at first. She might paint you as cold, uncaring, even cruel. But deep down, in the quiet moments, the moments she doesn't talk about, she knows. She knows you didn't leave to hurt her. You left because she refused to see what you were showing her all along. The value of connection, the beauty of mutual effort, the sacredness of being truly seen. So now alone, she's beginning to see it. Every emotion she buried is rising to the surface. The ache of your absence is the lesson. The silence you left behind, that's the teacher. And it's doing what you couldn't do for her while you were there. It's teaching her how to look inward, how to reflect, how to grow. And one day, when the sting is faded and the growth has settled, she'll look back and realize your goodbye was the beginning of her becoming. And in that moment, she won't just remember that you let go. She'll finally understand why, in the days after you let go, something curious begins to unfold, not just in her world, but in her mind. It's the gradual, almost imperceptible shift from certainty to doubt. See, when you were still around, even during the conflicts, Even during the misunderstandings and silences, there was a tether, a line she knew she could pull it, a name she could still whisper and expect a response. That security, even if she never voiced it, granted her a sense of power, a quiet control, not malicious necessarily, but present nonetheless. She knew your heart was still in it. She knew that no matter what, you hadn't truly gone. But now, you're not answering, you're not waiting, you're no longer emotionally available. And as that realization sets in, it doesn't hit like a wave. It creeps in quietly, slowly, but persistently. At first, she may dismiss it, call it ego, pride, the idea that maybe you're just being dramatic or playing games. She assumes you'll be back. After all, you always were. But something feels different this time. And slowly, that certainty she once had begins to crack. It's in those little moments of her day when it begins to gnaw at her. She's out with friends, pretending to laugh, but there's a nagging thought she can't shake. She checks her phone, again, not even realizing she was hoping to see your name. A memory flashes across her mind, a place you used to go, a phrase you always said, and the silence that follows is unbearable, not because it's loud, but because it's empty. And in that emptiness, she starts to wonder, what if he's really over me? That question, it cuts deeper than she expected, because for the first time, the power dynamic shifts. You're no longer orbiting her. You're not lingering in her gravitational pull. You've stepped off the stage. And now she's alone with the echo of everything she once took for granted. That's when the fear starts to set in, not just of losing you, but of what your absence says about her. Say, people don't usually reflect until they're forced to, until the illusion of control is shattered, until they realize the very thing they were certain would stay actually left. She begins to retrace the relationship, but now from a position of distance. She begins to see all the places she dismissed your needs, the conversations she shut down, the efforts she overlooked, not because she was cruel, but because she assumed you'd always be there. But here's the thing, you're not. And your absence, ironically, speaks louder than your presence ever did. It's not fueled by anger or revenge. It's quiet, intentional. And that makes it so much more powerful. Because she starts to understand that you're not playing games. You're not baiting her. You're not waiting for her to come back and plead. You've simply let go, fully. And that realization dismantles the image she had of you. The one where you were always available, always willing to try again. The idea that she could reach out one day and you'd still be there, holding on. But that man is gone. And in his place is someone who chose peace, who chose himself. At first, she resists this understanding. She may tell herself you're being cold, distant, emotionally unavailable, that you gave up too easily. But deep down, she knows that's not the truth. She knows you stayed far longer than most would have. You forgave more than she would have in your place. And still, it wasn't enough for her to change. So now she's alone with that truth. And it's not just about losing you, it's about what your absence reveals about her. Her inability to receive love when it was offered freely. Her fear of vulnerability. Her reluctance to show up emotionally. And that's the part that stings most. Because if you had stayed, she could have continued ignoring those parts of herself. She could have buried the self-reflection under your devotion. As I go in clarity, and here's the irony. In your absence, she begins to understand your value. Not just in the poetic sense, but in the real, raw, emotional depth of what you brought to her life. You weren't perfect. You had flaws, of course. But you showed up. You cared deeply. You loved genuinely. And now that you're gone, that clarity begins to emerge. She didn't lose a placeholder. She lost a man who meant every word, every gesture, every effort. Eventually, that understanding turns into regret. And not the kind that goes away with time. It lingers. It lives in the quiet moments, in the space where your presence used to be. And one day she will look back and realize that the moment you truly let go wasn't when you stopped texting, it wasn't when you stopped calling, it wasn't even when you walked away, it was when you stopped needing her to understand. There's a strange kind of silence that sets in when someone important disappears from your life. Not the kind that screams with drama or bursts with emotion, but a quiet stillness. It's the kind of silence that forces introspection, a space where the echoes of the past grow louder with each passing day. That's the silence she starts to hear when you're gone. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, when your energy no longer reaches her world. And inside that silence, something shifts. It's not immediate. It's not even obvious at first. But day by day, she begins to sense the void you've left behind. And with that void comes an unexpected question. What did I really lose? It's easy for people to pretend they're unaffected in the beginning. They post, they laugh, they carry on with their lives. The truth is, no one walks away from genuine connection unscarred. It lingers in the small things, the habits, the memories, the subtle ways your presence used to shape their days. And for her, that realization starts as a whisper. Maybe it's the way her morning feels less grounded without your text. Maybe it's that song that used to be background noise but now carries weight. Or maybe it's just a strange heaviness she can't explain, a subtle ache when she least expects it. That ache grows in the quiet. And that's when it really begins to dawn on her, not just what she lost, but how much of herself she didn't allow you to see. Because here's the paradox. People crave love, but they also fear exposure. She wanted to be known, but maybe she didn't let you see the whole truth. Maybe she wore masks, held back, stayed guarded, not because she didn't care, but because caring made her vulnerable. And vulnerability can be terrifying. But now, you're gone. You're not asking anymore. You're not trying to understand her anymore. You're not reaching for the walls she built. And suddenly she's left standing in that very space she fought to protect, alone. And in that loneliness, something else surfaces. Shame. Not just regret. Shame. Regret says, I wish I had done things differently. But shame says, maybe I wasn't enough when it counted. That's a heavy thought. Because when someone finally realizes they were loved for who they were, but chose to hide, to pull away, to push, they begin to question themselves. She starts to replay moments in her head, things you said that she brushed off, the way you tried to understand her moods, the nights you were patient when she was distant, the time you gave even when you weren't being met halfway. At the time, she might have thought she was being strong, independent, in control. But now, those moments look different. Now they look like missed chances. Now they look like fear disguised as pride. And what's worse is that it's too late to go back. The you that once waited with an open heart no longer stands in the same place. She can't call and pick up where things left off because the man who once would have answered, he's changed. He's grown. And in doing so, he's also moved beyond the point where her uncertainty could keep him tied down. And so she sits with that silence, becomes a mirror, one she can't look away from. And though she may not speak it aloud, there's a storm beneath her surface, a deep awareness of how much was given, how much was offered, how deeply she was seen, perhaps more than she was ever willing to see herself. That's the tragedy of these moments. We don't always know what something is until we're forced to live without it. And when a woman truly liked you, but never allowed herself to step into that truth, then your absence doesn't just hurt, it haunts. Huh? And in that haunting silence, where once your voice filled the gaps, she begins to understand not just who you were, but who she couldn't be with you, not because she didn't care, but because she wasn't ready, not ready to be vulnerable, not ready to risk being loved entirely. And now, the price of that fear is solitude. There's no vindication in this for you, no need to gloat or feel superior, but there is clarity. There's a painful, beautiful truth. Sometimes, the greatest impact you can have on someone is found not in what you do, but in what you no longer do. And that is when she starts to thank you, not with words, not with messages or calls, but with the quiet realization that the space you left behind demanded she finally face herself. There's something quietly devastating about realizing too late that someone saw your soul and accepted it before you even knew how to accept it yourself. And for her, that realization doesn't arrive with fireworks. It doesn't storm in like some grand epiphany. No, it creeps in slowly, like a fog in the early morning, blanketing everything in a heavy stillness. And in that stillness, she begins to feel the weight of what was once so close, so real, and so easily dismissed. At first, she told herself she didn't need you. Maybe she convinced herself that you were too much or not enough or that timing wasn't right. It's easier to dismiss something vulnerable than to admit we're afraid of it. So she told herself all the things people say to shield themselves from pain. He'll be fine. He'll wait. He'll always care. But what happens when he doesn't? What happens when the man who once looked at her with deep reverence, with hope, with belief, stops looking altogether? Silence doesn't sting at first. In fact, she may have welcomed it. A little breathing room, space to think, time to regroup. But the mind has a way of revisiting the past when the present feels too empty. She begins to replay the way you used to speak to her. Not just your words, but the intention behind them. The warmth in your tone, the calm in your eyes, the patience that filled the air when she was uncertain. You didn't try to fix her. You didn't try to shape her into what you needed. You saw her as she was, even when she was fragmented and guarded. And for reasons she may never fully understand, she walked away from that. Maybe it was her fear, maybe it was the baggage she hadn't unpacked yet, or maybe she believed she had more time to figure things out, to circle back. But people don't wait forever. And when she begins to sense that the door she always assumed was open is now firmly closed, that's when it begins to hurt. It's not just the loss of you, it's the loss of being understood by someone who genuinely saw her. It's rare. In a world that rewards performance, most people fall in love with illusions. You didn't. You looked behind the curtain. You saw the mess, the contradictions, the wounds, and you still stayed. Until one day, you didn't. And that's the moment her breath catches in her chest. Because for the first time, she understands what it means to be truly loved and to have rejected it. Not because it wasn't real, but because she wasn't ready to believe she was worthy of it. And now you're not there to remind her anymore. That absence becomes a mirror. Not a cruel one, but a painfully honest one. It reflects all the moments she hesitated, deflected, pulled back. It shows her the contrast between the man who leaned in and the woman who leaned out. It forces her to confront the truth that someone once offered her peace, stability, and truth. And she chose the storm she was more familiar with. That's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It lingers quietly, persistently. And it doesn't go away just because she finds distractions. Because deep down, she knows what she lost. Not just a man, but the version of herself she could have become if she had let that love soften her. She starts to feel that weight every time something reminds her of you. A phrase, a scent, a place. And she doesn't tell anyone. Not really. Because how do you explain to people that the one person who made you feel safe, you let slip away? And here's the hardest part. She knows now that if she came back, you wouldn't be waiting. Not in the same way. Because you've grown, you've healed, you've learned that love cannot thrive in one-sided pursuit. You've realized your worth. And that's what makes the silence louder for her. Because it's not just about missing you. It's about missing who she was with you and knowing that version of her doesn't exist anywhere else. So one day, maybe not soon, maybe not publicly, but one day, in the quiet of her own mind, she'll thank you. Not because you came back, not because she got another chance, but because your departure taught her more than your presence ever could. She'll thank you for loving her when she didn't know how to be loved. And she'll thank you in a way that stings more than it soothes for letting go. There's a peculiar kind of memory that settles in when the heart begins to ache from absence. Not the kind of absence that's dramatic or loud, but the quiet kind. The kind where your name doesn't come up in her conversations anymore, but it still lingers in her thoughts when she's alone. The kind where she's scrolling through her phone late at night and pauses on your contact, not to text you, but just to remember what it felt like when you were still reachable. And that's the turning point, the place where the emotional gravity begins to shift. See, people rarely realize the weight of your presence until it's no longer there to take for granted. That's just the truth of human nature. When something or someone is always accessible, it becomes part of the background noise of life. She didn't think about what it cost you to keep showing up, or what you were carrying in silence while trying to love her through her storms. Not because she was cruel, no, not at all, but because she was used to your steadiness. And steadiness is often mistaken for permanence. But now, in your absence, the full measure of that steadiness begins to echo. It echoes in the spaces where your voice used to offer reassurance. It echoes in the way she starts to second-guess herself, because she's lost that anchor that once reminded her she was enough, even when she didn't believe it. And that's where the shift starts to deepen. When the comfort of you has faded into silence and the noise of the world doesn't replace what you gave her, she begins to see it not as some grand revelation, but as a steady, growing ache that she can't quite name. She remembers your consistency, not in grand gestures, but in the everyday things. The way you remembered the little details, the way you noticed her moods before she spoke, the way you never made her beg for attention or question whether she was wanted. And that remembering, that's not casual. That's not nostalgic fluff. It cuts. Because she realizes, sometimes for the first time, that the kind of love you gave wasn't the kind you find often. It was quiet, it was real, and it was gone. And that absence isn't just emotional, it becomes physical. She starts to notice the space next to her, the space that used to hold your presence. She notices it when she's out at dinner and laughs at something, but glances around wishing you were there to hear it. She notices it in the quiet moments when her mind wanders back to you, even though she's trying so hard to move forward. The world might tell her to be strong, to forget, to find someone new, but hearts don't work like that. Because even if someone new enters her life, even if the days begin to look full again, the comparison will haunt her. Not because you were perfect, but because you were sincere, because you offered something that couldn't be manufactured, safety, emotional safety. And that's something you don't recognize until you're sitting in its absence, wondering why your chest feels hollow. And perhaps the most painful realization of all is this: you didn't walk away in anger, you didn't leave in bitterness, you let go with grace. And that's what lingers. That's what turns her memory into a mirror she can't avoid. Because if you had left in rage, she could have told herself a story that protected her pride. But you didn't. You left when love had nothing left to give, when it was no longer being received, when the silence from her side became too loud to ignore. And in that departure, you gave her the one thing she wasn't prepared to face, herself. And now, in your absence, she's beginning to meet herself for the first time. Not the version of her that was always defended and closed off, but the one who wonders why she couldn't just accept what you gave. And the tragic beauty of it all is that this growth, this awakening, it's blooming because you stopped watering a garden that wouldn't open to the sun. So while she may never say it, not directly, not in a message or a late night call, know this: she will carry the lessons you left behind in the silence. She will carry the sound of your care long after the words themselves are forgotten. And one day, when she's ready to admit it, even if only to herself, she'll realize that losing you wasn't just about losing love. It was about losing the mirror that showed her who she could have become, if only she had been ready to receive what you so freely gave. And that realization will live in her longer than any goodbye ever could. There comes a time when the clarity of distance reveals truths that were invisible in the fog of emotional closeness. And for her, that moment doesn't arrive in loud revelations or during dramatic nights of tears and regret. No, it creeps in slowly, in the quiet moments, when the noise of the past has finally faded and there's space for reflection. She'll sit with herself and realize that your goodbye wasn't the cruelty she once thought it was freedom. Not the kind wrapped in celebration or joy, but the kind that strips away illusions and forces something more powerful, self-confrontation. At first, she saw your leaving as abandonment, and why wouldn't she? People aren't always ready to face the mirror when it's been handed to them abruptly. When you walked away, she may have branded you as cold, distant, or even selfish, but those labels were never about you. They were her defense mechanism, her way of preserving a narrative where she remained blameless, because if you were the villain, she didn't have to question her role in the collapse. But time doesn't cater to illusions forever. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to see that the real pain wasn't in your departure, it was in what your departure revealed. She started to revisit the memories, not from a place of hurt, but curiosity. What did she ignore? What did she silence in you that ultimately made you choose self-respect over compromise? And that's when the transformation begins. She may have once seen you as weak for leaving. She'll later understand it took strength, more strength than she had at the time. Because walking away from someone you love isn't an act of cruelty, it's an act of integrity. When that love is no longer met with growth, with mutual care, with genuine accountability. You didn't slam a door, you closed it gently and walked through it quietly, and that silence was louder than any argument you could have had. It will dawn on her that your exit was the beginning of her becoming, because it pushed her to confront the parts of herself she was content to let lie dormant. The need for validation, the fear of being alone, the comfort in control. These things were not love. They were safety nets. And your goodbye cut the ropes. You forced her to live without the very dynamic that kept her safe, but stagnant. Maybe she didn't start healing for the right reasons. Maybe she wanted to win the breakup or become someone you'd regret losing. But as she climbed, she discovered something unexpected. She liked who she was becoming, not for you, not for revenge, but for herself, because for the first time, she wasn't chasing someone else's approval. She was learning how to stand on her own feet. And she wouldn't have done that if you'd stayed. That's the paradox. The very thing she once hated you for becomes the turning point she grows to appreciate, not because it was painless, but because it forced a reckoning. You didn't rescue her, you didn't fix her, you left, and in that void, she had to find the strength to rebuild without leaning on you. That's why one day, maybe years from now, she'll look back and feel gratitude, not bitterness. And let's be honest, that kind of gratitude rarely gets expressed out loud. She may never send a message, she might not even say it to anyone else, but deep down she'll know it. She'll know that your absence carved space for her rebirth, that your goodbye was never a betrayal, it was a painful gift wrapped in silence. And it's that quiet, dignified decision that altered the trajectory of her life in a way comfort never could. So if you ever doubt the impact of your decision to walk away, remember this: some gifts aren't recognized the moment they're given. They require pain, reflection, and growth to be unwrapped. But once opened, they change everything.